Shit. I just shot a 6-point. 5 yards.
November 5th, 2022. Got my first archery bow buck, and I got a lot of the video on Snapchat just talking through the different setups, how I got there and why I was there. But I wanted to take some time and really go over it in detail. Why was I even going here in the first place? What route did I take? What changes did I make as I was doing it? So I just took some time on a map and really just talked through it, used my cursor and tried to map out exactly what happened. I threw in some snips of the Snapchat there so you can see that. And, I just want to give a thank you to my cousin, Anthony, for listening to all of my banter, kicking around ideas, talking through situations and, why I think this, why I think that. His help, with his input. I want to thank Cooper, and I haven't actually hung out with him since high school, but we've been texting back and forth for the last year, and he's been very, very helpful, helping me think through various situations. So, hope you enjoy, and I hope this isn't the last time I'm putting a clip together like this. So, without further ado, let's see what happened.
So for starters, this is a OnX map of just the small portion of the property that I was really focusing in on. So I had a camera that I had placed right there and right here. Now, I've had those cameras there for 2 years now. Last year, they weren't super productive, but this year, they blew up. I had big bucks on both cameras, and as we got into the middle of October, I had one buck that was showing up in the afternoon about an hour before sundown. So I knew that he was bedding close by. I think he was trying to get up into these fields where our neighbors tend to plant various food plots. So I think that's ultimately where he was going. So being that it was, an hour before daylight and I had him on both cameras, there's a ridge that runs right through here. I was assuming that he was bedding up on this ridge someplace, somewhere in this region. Some days he would go that way, some days he would go that way. So towards the latter part of October, I think the date was like October 25th, I was going to hunt right on top of this camera to see if I could capitalize on this movement, which I thought is what he was doing. So there's a trail, you can kind of see it right here. This trail runs all the way through the property, gets down to this permanent stand that we have set, and dumps out into this rock swamp, continues on, even goes out. But I was going to walk this trail and come into this little rock swamp, pop through, and get set up right on top of this camera. Well, what had happened was I parked the four-wheeler, I don't know, somewhere in here, and I walked the trail. And when I got to this permanent stand, and you can see it denoted by this black stand right there, this big 8-point, probably the biggest one that we had on camera, oddly enough, was bedded maybe 30 yards off the road, and I kicked him up that day. So this buck ran off somewhere over to this direction. Now, I was scared to continue to push him. I could have, tried to circle around and do one of these numbers, but I didn't necessarily want to do that. So I ended up just setting up somewhere around here, and ultimately he never came back. The hope was that maybe he didn't necessarily know exactly what I was, or maybe thought that I left and he wanted to come back to where he was initially bedded down. So since that didn't happen, I went back after the end of the day was over, and then I had another 2 weeks before I was coming up for my archery week. I planned my access in the event that he was going to be right in here again. So it was Saturday midday of my archery week, November 5th, I believe. This map doesn't necessarily show it all too well, but there is a creek that runs right about in here someplace, right about where my mouse cursor is. So I still wanted to get to my camera, but I didn't want to bump out anything that was right in here. because, I bumped him out of there once. I've still got him on the cameras, I think. So he's probably not very far away. So that evening comes around, park the four-wheeler here again, and rather than walking down the road, I jump in the creek. And I walked this creek. It was dry at the time, so I walked this creek all the way, and I get to right about here, somewhere in here. I didn't necessarily know exactly where it was. There's no service in here, and I didn't think to pull up my map. But I knew that if I went south, I would eventually get to this rock swamp, which is where I was trying to get to anyway. So I got to here, and I looked around, and I was trying to find a tree, because I kind of liked the area, but it wasn't where I wanted to go. So I went south, and I did eventually hit the rock swamp. And I actually passed my camera on the way, and I grabbed the card. I ended up setting up right about there, right about in here someplace. And it was in this pine tree. I ended up being about 4 or 5 feet off the ground, and it was thicker than crap. I had rubs all over in here. I mean, it was just tore up, presumably from this buck that I kicked out right here. And those were new rubs that were not there the week of October 25th when I kicked him up initially. So that was my indication that this buck was still in the area, and he was still tearing things up.
We got an interesting one tonight. About 2 weeks ago, I was up here, and I bumped a really big deer. So today I decided I was going to go after him this afternoon. My friend Derek talked me into going into the swamp, going into thick stuff since it's so warm and so windy. So I went back into his bedroom. My cousin is about maybe 200 yards that way. And he actually kicked him up on the way in and pushed him this direction. So I've got rubs all over the place in here. I don't see any scrapes, but just rubs everywhere. And I know he beds about 50 yards away from me. So I'm about 8 feet off the ground in this little pine tree. I got shots right here. There's big rubs right in here. I got to rub on that tree, rub on that tree, rub on that tree, rub on that tree right here, one on that one, and a couple right in here. I mean, this place is pounded. So only 8 feet off the ground, and I've got, hell, I might not even be 8 feet off the ground, and my shot windows are tight. So it's gonna be close quarters if it actually happens. He's coming this way, so he's not far. Fingers crossed.
So I sat here for about an hour. I can't explain why. I don't know if it was my shot windows that I had or what, but just something about the spot just did not make me feel like it was going to happen right there. So with an hour left in daylight, I climbed down, got back into this rock swamp, and I went to where I initially thought about setting up, which was past the camera, a little bit higher, right about to where the mouth of the creek jumped out. And I found a tree in here that I looked at when I came out of the creek. I looked at it and I said, at the time, that maybe I could hunt out of it, but I wasn't 100% sure. If I did, I couldn't get very high because I was kind of in the open a little bit. So on my walk back in to get to there, I found this scrape. I mean, this scrape was huge. It was the size of a car hood. I know you hear that a lot, but it was the size of a car hood. It was fresh. You could see tracks in it. All the leaves were off. The dirt was very, very recently pushed around. So I felt like I needed to be within range of this scrape that was right here. So I ended up going further north a little bit, setting up in that tree that I initially called out. And I got 5 to 6 feet off the ground, and there was a bush that was right in front of me that was actually kind of blocking the upper or the bottom half of my body. So it worked out really well.
All right, update. I just wasn't feeling it in that last spot. So I got out and I just started poking around a little bit around the area. And I walked about, I don't know, maybe 50 yards more. towards the swamp, I guess. And I just found this massive scrape, so I slid up a little bit. So that's where I'm going to be for the last hour. The scrape is right back here. Right there, I'm sorry. So I can see this swamp in here. There's a couple rubs in here. I'm guessing it's from that same buck. I think he's just living in here. But super thick. It's still gonna be close quarters.
About 10 minutes into my sit, you'll see it in my explanation video on what happened. This buck pops out somewhere in here. Now, I think he was bedded there. I thought I saw him stand up, but for all I know, maybe he came through here or came from another direction, but I thought I saw him stand up. But he walks this edge, and I grunt at him a few times. He stops and looks and ultimately didn't really care. At least I didn't think he cared. And he wanders off into this region, and I lose sight of him. So 45 minutes goes by, 6 o'clock hits. I stand up. I'm thinking about getting down. And lo and behold, he comes around this corner right here, and I pick eyes on him. And I watched him come all the way to me, and he was definitely going to that scrape. So I'm guessing he was the one working it. And I shot him, like I said in my video, 5 yards. So that's how this whole thing kind of worked out. Now, was it the buck that was making all that sign that I was seeing in here? I have no idea. Was he the one that made the scrape that I found? Maybe. I don't know. What I learned later on in the week is there was a pretty hot doe bedding area that was right in here. So I actually watched him check that doe bedding area. I went back with my cousin to this same tree, and we watched another 4-point come back and check this bedding area. And on that same sit, we watched an 8-point kick a doe out of this bedding area. And that was a fun little encounter, but we had him in front of us for about 10 minutes, but he wasn't coming any closer. So notes for next year, doe bedding area, maybe instead of sitting here and trying to call one over, maybe it's something along the lines of walking this ridge, dropping down in, and sitting right here on this doe bedding area, planning for bucks to maybe come from here and walk that edge again, or if they're laying down right in here to come out and pop here, leave this alone. Maybe this is where he was bedding, and just hang out with these does. But that's the plan for next year. That's how I ended up here. I mean, it worked out. It was cool. So.
Holy shit. I just shot a 6-point. 5 yards. I'm 6 feet up in a freaking tree. He was right here. Unbelievable. I saw him come out in the swamp. He came out here, walked that way. About, 30 minutes went by, and I guess he circled and came back. So he came back this way, walked right through, and right there, I can see my arrow. Arrow looks like it has blood on it, so I'm gonna give it another 5 minutes.
Let's go.
Let's go!
Let's go.